Hello, today we'll be talking about the no arbitrage principle in finance. It is one of the key principles in pricing derivatives, and today we'll be looking at it through the example of a forward contract. So before we begin, the law of no arbitrage states that one cannot make return over the risk-free rate without incurring some sort of risks. And if there is an ability to make a riskless return, then that would mean that there is arbitrage on the market. And usually the forces of demand and supply quickly act to rectify this. So without further ado, let's begin. We'll start off by looking about refreshing our minds about what is the payoff of a forward contract. And that is simply the underlying asset, which for our cases is the stock, at time equals capital T, i.e. the maturity of the forward contract, minus the strike price, which will be denoting by G. And what is the idea of the forward contract? It's basically that you're locking in the price of an asset at the strike price. So this is done at the very inception of the contract, where two parties agree to buy and sell the asset at a certain price, and that price is the strike price at some point in the future. So say, for example, that you want to buy an asset at some point in the future, but you're afraid of it to appreciate in price. So what would you do is you'd enter into a forward contract, and when the time comes where you have to buy the asset, you will buy the asset at the market price. However, because you've entered into a forward contract, you will also get the forward contract payoff. And therefore, what are you actually paying? It's actually the strike price. 1 second. Okay. So now let's look at what is the value of the forward contract. Well, we know the forward contract at the expiry is simply the payoff. That is the value of the forward contract at expiry. But what is the value of the forward contract at inception? Well, the answer to that is 0. And the reason why it's 0 is because there was no cash exchange at inception. So I'd like you to think of it in terms, I would like you to think of the forward contract as a simple good, an item which you would buy and sell in the market. So if it's an asset and it has no value, okay, then a seller could give it to you for free. And that is the simple answer to why the forward contract at time equals 0 has a value of 0. It's because there is no value for the buyer or the seller. It's simply 0. And the question is, does it have to be? Well, it doesn't have to be. It's actually just the way the forward contract was created. It was created to just be an agreement, okay, to buy or sell the asset at some point in the future, and that's it. It could have been that we would agree to buy the assets in some time in the future, but that agreement costs £10. And we will understand right now how that interprets. So we will look at a time frame of 2 discrete points of time, which is time 0, the time of the inception of the forward contract, and time capital T, which is the expiry of the forward contract, or rather the maturity. So what is asset number 1? Well, we're going to use the forward contract as asset number 1. And we assumed from the beginning that the value of the forward contract is equal to 0. And as I stated, it is not necessarily the case by any reason. It's just simply the way that the forward contract has developed. It's a simple contract where there's no cash exchange at the beginning, and at the end, that's when there is an actual payoff. So what is the payoff of that? We said before, it's simply the stock price minus the strike price. So we want something which replicates this payoff. And what is it that replicates it? Well, we know we can buy the stock and at time 0, so that will give us the stock at time 0, and therefore at time capital T, it'll simply become S at capital T. And we could have a cash amount of equivalent to the strike price, but discounted at the risk-free rate. Now, why discounted at the risk-free rate? It's because we assume that when moving from time 0 to time T, that we can invest it at the risk-free rate. And for investing, we're using continuously compounded investment. So, having said that, if we have two assets, so this is asset number 2, which provide us with the same payoff at time equal capital T, therefore, at time 0, this relationship must hold. And if this relationship does not hold, therefore there would be arbitrage in the market. Because think of it in terms of a simple asset in the market, okay? So we have, think of it as if it's two assets in the market, which we know at some point in the future will give us the same payoff. So if one of them is cheaper than the other, then you would buy the cheaper one. Okay, we'll look at we'll understand it a bit more clearly through maths in just a second, but it's a very simple concept. These two assets must have the same value if they give the same payoff. Hence, we reached to this equation over here. And we said that the value of the contract at inception is equal to 0. So what would that mean? Well, under no arbitrage, the strike price, which is what we're trying to find out here, we want to find out what is the price that the two parties will agree on to buy and sell the asset at some point in the future. And since this is 0, never mind. So I will just explain it. I will just show the math over here just in case some people got confused as how I moved to this step. Simply, I substituted V0 with 0. So we have 0 is equal to SO minus G, which is the strike price discounted at the risk-free rate. I then moved G, which is strike price discounted at the risk-free rate, equals to SO. And therefore, I multiply both sides by the exponential of e to the power of RT, so I can get the strike price value, which is equal to this. And therefore, this is the concept of how no arbitrage allows us to get the value of the strike price that both parties will agree on. So coming back to the point of stating that the value of the contract is set equal to 0 based on convention of this is how the forward contract was developed. Well, just for illustration, if the value of the forward contract is, for example, £10, well, that's not an issue. We know then if the value of the contract is equal to £10, that the buyer of the forward contract, the person who will get this payoff, will pay the seller of the forward contract, who, by the way, his payoff is simply the opposite of this. So it's equal to negative of the stock price minus the strike price, i.e. The strike price minus the stock price. So he will pay £10 to the seller of the contract if they set the value equal to 10. But if they set the value equal to 10, we have to come back and ask, what is the no arbitrage price of the what is the no arbitrage strike price? So simply doing it, we will figure out at the end that it is equal to so again, I'll just show you what I did over here mathematically in case there's some confusion. So all that happened is I moved GOT e to the power of negative RT to the other side. So plus 10 equals SO. I then discounted everything by the risk-free rate. I multiplied everything by the exponential of e to the power of RT, and therefore I had is equal to plus 10 e to the power of RT equals to SO, and therefore I moved G O of t is equal to SO minus 10 e to the power of RT. Apologies for that. I think I put a negative over here, which was incorrect. This is not supposed to be a negative. Or is it? This should be a positive over here, and this should be a positive over here. So what I just showed you is that the value is just a convention that we use the value equal to 0 because there is no cash exchange. So let's see what would happen if there is arbitrage, and how could we make arbitrage if this equation does not hold. Okay, so let me just copy that equation. So now that we have this equation, I will just manipulate it slightly for convenience, and this will be able to eventually show us how we could make an arbitrage in the market. So I will just move that cash equivalent strike price to, which is discounted at the risk-free rate. We will move it to the other side and have the equation equal this. So again, we'll look at it through time periods. So we have time equals 0 equals capital T, and we have those two assets which have equivalent payoff, as mentioned before. So what will be the payoff of the stock? Well, it's simply the stock price at time T, capital T. And what is the payoff of this asset? Well, without thinking, we know that they're equivalent, so it must be the stock price at capital T, but let's just go through it. So it'll be ST minus GO, GO capital T, and this invested at the risk-free rate would be GO of T, and therefore we can cancel those two out. And therefore they have the same payoff. So assume now that this relationship does not hold, and that VO plus G, which is the strike price discounted at the risk-free rate, is less than the stock price. So again, I'll just repeat it again. We have two assets, they have the same payoff. One of them is cheaper than the other. So what would the logical thing to do would be to buy cheap and sell expensive. So assume that we don't have any cash. What would we do? Well, the first step would be to short sell the asset. And so short selling is the concept of selling something that you don't have right now, but getting the cash now, and in some point in the future, you would provide that asset to the person you sold it to. So I can short sell the stock, which is the more expensive thing. So the thing that I would like to sell, and I'd like to buy cheap, if you remember. So I'm going to short sell the stock, get the value of the stock, which is going to be equal to SO, and invest it at the risk-free rate. So I will have, first of all, I'll short sell the stock, get cash equal to SO. Number two is I will get into a forward contract. So I will be the buyer of the forward contract. Remember, I want to buy cheap, and this is the forward contract, so I will buy it. Again, forward contract by convention has a value of 0, so there's not really paying anything. And I will invest so let's just write it down. Buy forward contract. And step 3 would be to invest the SO cash at the risk-free rate. And finally, for step 4, when we move to finally time capital T, I would basically, this asset would give me a payoff of the payoff of the forward contract, which would simply be ST minus GO capital T. And remember, I invested the cash equivalent of SO at the risk free rate. So this is what I get. And hence, step 5 would be to fulfill my short selling obligation, i.e. I would have to give the asset that I sold and got the money for in the beginning to the person that I sold it to. So with this money, I will buy the stock price, I will buy the stock in the market, and therefore I'd be left with simply SO. So I'll just write this down for convenience. So number 5, fulfill short selling obligation, and consequently left with this component over here. So that is SO invested at the risk-free rate minus G, which is the strike price. So now remember we said that we assumed over here that SO is greater than this component over here. And we said that the value of the forward contract at the beginning is equal to 0. Therefore, what we could also, this interprets as that SO e to the power of RT. I'm just basically getting this over here. So I'm basically changing this format to get it into this format. And is basically greater than the strike price. And if I multiply that by this, then this will cancel out and we'll just be left with this. So we're saying that if this is the case, then this is greater than this part over here. Therefore, the value of this whole thing is greater than 0. And if it's greater than 0, that means we are making free money. And that's the whole idea behind the law of no arbitrage in the forward contract context. Thank you very much for listening. Let me know if you enjoyed this sort of video and if it was informative. This is my first YouTube video, so any feedback would be helpful. And thank you very much for listening.